Guys, I might have some good news for the crypto world. And this goes on my video yesterday that I did of Xi Jinping's only chance is crypto. Well, China's financial sector is on the verge of collapse. And it's because of their shadow banking system and their real banking system. The shadow banking system in China is worth $3 trillion. What is shadow banking? Shadows are kind of shady, And if you think this industry is shady, you are right. It is very, very shady. And one of its biggest members actually missed dozens of payments on various financial products, which bolsters the fact that they might be on the verge of collapse and they need to find something else to support the Chinese economy. Now, a shadow bank is basically a company that uses a lot of wealth management products, and through those wealth management products, they pay some kind of discount or interest, basically each month or each set period of time, so people can actually live off of it or get a little bit of income off of it. But a lot of times, it's very, very shady. And even though the shadow banking realm in China is regulated by the government, there's a lot of shady business, even dealing with government officials on a lot of these shadow banks. They're not proper banks, and they don't have to follow the proper banking regulations, which makes them a lot more dangerous. And obviously, if you've seen the marketing ads, these guys are very, very aggressive in marketing. And because they are really, really aggressive in marketing, they make promises sometimes that they can't keep. It's okay as long as property values keep rising up and the economy is good, but because of COVID and everything else, things are falling apart in the land of the dragon. So, these shadow banks, types of shadow banking. Shadow banking in China involves several different forms of wealth activity, some which include banks and others which do not. In China, the most common forms of shadow banking include the use of wealth management products, other trust products, and trusted loans, as well as financial system interlinkages, such as transferring beneficiary rights for trust accounts. It's a little bit more slippery and shady than actual banking. So what are wealth management products? Wealth management products are issued by banks, trusts, and securities firms that are financial products that have higher monetary return than depositing your money in a bank. But of course, these financial products are way more risky too. And if the financial situation goes bad, they can quickly go to zero. They're designed and sold by financial institutions as savings products, but do not appear on the institution's balance sheets, meaning they are not affected by deposit regulations. No regulations, a lot more shady, a lot more wiggle room as to what you can do, but less protection. Their yield comes from the performance or value of assets upon which the product is built. I'm guessing a lot of the things in China are built on the property's values. And since property's values are sort of collapsing at this point, they can't really make their payments. They work through offering fixed rate return that is more profitable than traditional depositing. In China, some investors will expect the bank controlling the WMP to bear the risk of the credit risk associated with it. But that's often not the case. The number of WMPs throughout China has increased steadily in the recent times because it's a very exploitative market and they can take advantage of people. Approximated to be less than 500 billion in 2004 to 9.5 trillion yen by the end of 2013. 9.5 trillion, roughly $1.2 trillion. Right now, the industry is roughly like $3 trillion. So basically, there's a bunch of these products. Some people expect the institution issuing them to bear the risk, but the institution issuing them did not actually bear the risk, unfortunately. And of course, it's not only the shadow banks. Real banks face also $200 billion in losses of property as well. And that does not basically bode well for real banks. And as we see here, they also have a $550 billion gap to fill. And of course, these are too big to fail lenders. And the thing is, if they can't make the $550 billion shortfall, they will have to liquidate, and then the credit is going to be such a crisis in China. So these so-called Big Four Chinese lenders are classified global systematically important banks, or GSIBs, by Basel Committee on Banking Supervision and are required to hold TLAC equal to 16% of risk-weighted assets by January 1st, 2025. To meet the requirement, Ratings expects the lenders to issue a combination of traditional regulatory capital instruments alongside a new class of bond, but they have a lot to actually fill. And of course, this has actually gotten a lot of attention lately because China's economy is actually way, way worse than the United States'. And there's like huge protests back home last year with several rural banks actually failing, and there's no way to stop that. And it's been said that over 200 rural banks have actually had trouble or is failing. And if you thought the US banking situation is bad, China is having a lot more serious bank runs out there. As you can see, some of these shadow banks like Zhorong, which is the biggest shadow bank in the entire industry, they miss like a dozen payments on various products. There are a lot of protests out there, but they can't do anything about it because they really can't, because like they just don't have the money right now. Remember, a lot of this stuff is dependent on the value of properties, and with very few people to buy the expensive property, with a lot of properties that are actually built that no one's buying, go-sees and such, the government can only do so much to actually keep these things up, and they can't always just float these products up. So without that revenue, they can't actually pay off on the interest, and they've missed several payments, as you can see here. I'm not going to play the video because I don't want to get copyright struck, but China's shadow bank Zhongrong misses payments, sparking protests. And we have trillions of dollars, not yuan, dollars worth in this shadow banking sector, and everything starts to fall apart. Then a lot of people start to lose savings because remember, it's a shadow banking system. That means it's more shady than the regular banking system, which is already shady enough. And so a lot of people are actually going to lose their savings, and this has already sparked protests. Them missing payments has sparked protests. Wait until people figure out that they've actually lost all their financial capital. As you can see in the description, Zhongrong International Trust Co., one of China's biggest shadow banks, missed payments on dozens of products as the fallout from a deepening property slump spreads to the financial sector. About 24 people protested outside the firm's office. Remember, this is China, where protests could get you shot. So if you think 24 is small, remember the consequences. And this stuff is actually going to grow. And in China, it's way more than that. There's been a ton of protests over banking failures and the government's inability to actually cover these banking failures. Remember, when we had a banking run, victims were bailed out in 3 days, which means they didn't lose any money. But in China, when these rural banks fail, many have been waiting a year to actually get this money. And there's like a lot more than 24 people out here, and they're actually wearing masks to cover their faces. There's a lot of people demonstrating outside a branch of China's central bank in the landlocked province of Henan. So Henan had many banks actually freeze accounts, and many banks actually fail. So they're among the thousands of depositors in China that protesters say are still campaigning for compensation after last year's rural banking scandal saw their accounts frozen. You realize what would happen to the American economy if the government didn't bail out just one banking failure? They're not bailing out a lot of these rural banks. And of course, people can't really do much about it because it's the Chinese government. In America, this would cause mass chaos. But this is not that uncommon in China. But if you have enough of these banks fail, people will actually protest because they don't have any money anymore to buy the necessary needs for life. So America's Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, got their money back in 3 days. But China's Henan Village Bank's customers haven't been given a cent in a year because the bank has no money and the government doesn't have any money. Everything's kind of broke over there. We talk about how China doesn't have that much debt, but they are actually broke as well. China's latest, because their credit isn't as great. China's latest banking scandal started in April when 5 rural banks, 4 in Henan and one in the eastern province of Anhui, froze depositor funds. Sally and Lifeweek, a state-owned magazine, estimated that 400,000 customers were affected. This is a very big deal. One of them actually said he put his entire family's savings worth about 5 million yuan or $726,000 into one of the banks, and he's kind of out of luck. Losing 5 million yuan, $726,000, would be devastating, even in the United States to you and me, more so devastating in China because their salaries aren't as high. So he's saying, I'm begging from others or receiving donations. If I can't get the money soon, then my children and I can only live in the streets without a house or a home. And this is how bad it's actually gotten. This will stir instability back at home. And he's not the only one. There's dozens, hundreds, thousands of people in his situation. Of course, the peaceful demonstrations were violently crushed by local officials and they were arresting people. But as these failures pile up, there's going to be great unrest in the economy. And this is why the Council of Elders, this is one of the main reasons why the Council of Elders is actually looking to oust Xi Jinping, because he cannot solve these problems. I don't think ousting Xi Jinping will actually solve these problems, because they're not really problems that are even solvable at this point. But they need someone to take the blame, and Xi Jinping could be the fall person. So that all brings us to crypto. These guys need to make money somehow, and crypto is still illegal in China. But the Chinese government might actually overlook some of these firms actually going into crypto to try to make some money this year or next year if they run out of ways to actually make money. We know how fast Bitcoin can go up, especially towards a halving. The Chinese government probably knows that as well. And it might actually try to start a bull run by itself, because it's desperate for these institutions to gain money to pay off the customers so they won't start a mass riot and protest. Xi Jinping might be desperate because he needs to gain credibility in the eyes of the people. And if he can't gain credibility in the eyes of the people, he might be voted out of the office and pwned by his enemies. And the Chinese Communist Party overall needs to gain credibility as well, because things aren't going well. And when you're in that kind of dictatorship environment, people will give you credit for the country's success, but they will also blame you for the country's failures. And the thing is, people are saying that at least 1/3 or 1/4 of the small banks in China are in trouble, and they actually represent a lot of China's wealth. So basically, about 1/4 of the Chinese banking industry's total assets are held by around 4,000 small lenders, which often have opaque ownership and governance structures and are more vulnerable to corruption. But it's not only corruption, it's the whole system they're set on is a complete house of cards. And many of them are heavily invested in Chinese property, which has not been doing so well. So if you're actually asking me, like in the last video, why is it so important that China holds its property up, prices up? It's not only because due to families' individual wealth, is because these banks completely depend on it. And the thing is, they can't really stop this, so they have to look for other ways. They definitely have to look for other ways to actually make money to hold this up. And crypto in the next, around this next bull run, might be the way they come into it. Now, I do think it is actually just a coincidence that they decided to open up Hong Kong around the same time as the stuff is happening, but they definitely are opportunists, and they could definitely take crypto. And even if it's illegal to basically common people, it won't be illegal for the banks to actually invest in this stuff, and they might do it just to bail themselves out. And Xi Jinping might let them because he needs to be bailed out as well. And as for the common people, if so many people are actually desperate and they're looking for any way to make money, if they actually allow this in China, a lot of those people are going to sign on to crypto as well. So crypto might actually be the only short-term and maybe even long-term answer to this Chinese problem and Xi Jinping's problem. So this is built off that last video. And China could actually be a big catalyst for crypto in the next bull run. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.